I resisted it for a long time. I didn't want to do it. It was always the wrong time. But finally, I did it. I bought a drone. It's not just any old drone. It's one of the newest out there. It's the DJI Mavic Pro. And today, I'm going to review it. For starters, let's talk about what makes the Mavic different from many of the drones that you see out there. It's compact. Super compact. I purchased mine in a kit where the Mavic can do its folding routine and then fit into its handy carrying bag, along with extra batteries, the controller, maybe some extra propellers and a set of filters, and even a few other things. Many of the drones with comparable capabilities to the Mavic are larger and just can't squeeze down into this form factor. It's easy for me to put the Mavic in my backpack along with my other adventure items and then deploy the Mavic when I get to where I'm going. In fact, the reason that I jumped at the Mavic is that I finally saw a drone that would fit in with what I do, both from a size and a capabilities perspective. If you aren't familiar with what I do, you can check out my adventures playlist at the link above. Now let's discuss using the Mavic, because portability is great, but it doesn't do much for you if it's not fun to use or it doesn't get the job done. While I've messed around with toy drones, I'd never had one with GPS on board and is controlled from a phone. This was a whole new world for me, and I was completely scared out of my mind on my first few flights. And frankly, I'd be lying if I didn't say that my heart starts beating a little bit faster every time I take her out. I'm big on safety, which means that when I am flying this with this, I'm putting a lot of faith in this little guy's brain and the communication between the controller and the drone. So, to help overcome the fears, there's a beginner mode, which limits some of the capabilities, but it gets you accustomed to operating the Mavic in the real world without causing too much chaos. I stayed in beginner mode for my first few flights, and I'm glad that I did. It helped me immerse myself into the system, but also made sure that my first few flights were successful and problem-free. Those first few flights gave me the seat time to know the different items that are on the screen or that might pop up on the screen during flight. There's a few things to keep an eye on. Battery levels are, of course, important. And the Mavic is periodically going to warn you about items such as wind, obstacles, whether or not you're in restricted airspace, and the Mavic's own system health and status. Those early flights, they helped me understand that not every warning is going to ruin my flight. Those are just some things that I need to be aware of. Experienced drone pilots might not be quite as cautious as I was, but remember, this really was my first rodeo. So, let me talk about those first few flights, first in beginner mode and then in full grown-up pants mode. Honestly, it was easy. Don't get me wrong, I read all of the materials that came with the Mavic, and when flying, if there was a notification or an alert that I did not immediately understand, I either landed or hovered until I knew exactly what it was telling me. That being said, it was unbelievably easy to get started. Here are the facts. First, I was learning. If you're not experienced with a drone of this caliber, like I wasn't, spend some quality time with the manual. Next, I was flying, and yes, still learning in beginner mode so that the drone didn't get too far away from me or get there too fast. Then I was flying in grown-up mode, recording the video that I wanted and expected. More on that in a minute though. And after that, even as I felt that I was mastering all of the controls and the settings and the flight behaviors, I was still learning. Okay, you get it. Learning is a big theme with me for this. I've never taken the Mavic to the same place twice. I've flown in the open desert, next to the mountains, and even through the forest. I've flown over water and in Narnia. I even launched straight out of the crater of a hopefully extinct volcano. I've had to improvise launch and landing areas, deal with sudden rain and snow, and send the Mavic straight back to me when it got worried about extremely high winds. Each time, I was learning the ifs and thens and making sure that she got back safely every time while still delivering on the videos that you all expect from me. But I feel like I was able to learn quickly because, again, it really is so easy to fly, so I could focus on alerts or trying new things. Now let's get into that a little bit more, the why it was so easy to fly. Because it's easy to overlook this when you're talking about the Mavic itself. The controls. It's quick to attach my phone here and open up the app, and then you're working with a combination of the phone and the controller. It's a lot to take in at first, but it's also a bit like riding a bike. So soon I was flying in one direction, panning around, adjusting exposure, all while keeping an eye on the Mavic's altitude and other important status items and warnings like battery life remaining. I think my message on this is take the time and don't go for that amazing epic adventure flight until you're actually comfortable with everything that this controller setup offers. Along those same lines, the DJI Go 4 app is where you set up all of your preferences and flight parameters. You can set your home point, maximum altitude, video settings, and so much more. And the app remembers what you did last time, which I find particularly helpful. That being said, I always review them before a flight anyway. It's quick, so I like to play it safe that way. Workflow is really like any of my other digital cameras. The Mavic accepts a micro SD card, and you can transfer images and video either by removing the card or plugging the Mavic into your computer. I've used both methods without issue, which brings me to my next topic, video. The video is so great. There are quite a number of options. I played around with shooting in 4K at 30 frames per second, at 1080p at 60 frames per second, but you can even shoot 1080p at up to 96 frames per second or 720p at 120 frames per second. It's super easy to start and stop video or to just take a picture, even adjust exposure compensation. And the Mavic has a cinema mode where it slows the breaking a bit so that your footage is more smooth and, well, cinematic. And adding to that cinematic quality, even when you're in regular flight mode, the Mavic flies in a super stable fashion, even when it's a bit windy. And you've got a gimbal here in the front to keep the camera steady. Now, this isn't one of those drones where you can slap an action camera on here or a mirrorless camera. This is a dedicated rig that is a part of the Mavic. One of my early concerns was actually that I didn't know if this camera was going to produce the results that I'd want or expect. The answer is that it does. It definitely delivers quality. There's a great amount of dynamic range and color depth for editing, but I found that the colors right out of the camera are often rich and plenty saturated, though it does lean a little bit towards the conservative side overall, but that gives you more latitude when editing. Guys, there's plenty more coming from me on the Mavic, but I wanted to give you an overview now that I've been flying at least weekly for the past few months. So let's bring this home with the facts according to SnapChick. 1, this has been an amazing first time big boy drone experience. 2, I'm glad that I purchased a kit with the case and the extra batteries. When I go into the wild, I want to get as much flight and video time as possible. And 3 batteries lets me fly for about an hour total. Incidentally, I also swapped out the included micro SD card with a larger capacity card. Now I'm confident that I will be able to handle whatever I want to do on any given trip. 3, be prepared for what you're doing and be safe. Double check those menus and settings. And if you're not sure about a notification or something happens that you did not expect, play it safe. I haven't had any problems or times when I thought something bad might happen, but remember, these blades are spinning fast in tight circles in the air. You don't want to be the guy that turns a fun day of flight into an attack of the weed whacker from hell. 4, one thing that slowed me down a few times was firmware updates. What's great is that DJI is continually keeping you up to date with the latest flight software for the Mavic. The thing to keep in mind is that when you're out in the field and there's a new update available, the Mavic wants to update right then and there. This keeps your Mavic smart, but I've made it a habit to check for updates the night before an adventure or early the same morning so that I'm not out in the field somewhere waiting on a firmware update to complete. I'm not complaining about this though, because I definitely want my Mavic to know everything that it needs to know from DJI's latest firmware. but it's definitely something to keep in mind as you work with it. 5. The Mavic has definitely become a part of my digital lifestyle, both as SnapChick and as just a regular real-life person that likes to play with things. I mean, I flew the thing over my parents' house to help my dad check out the roof without actually getting the ladder out, but I also foresee continuing to use it as a part of my adventures. It's definitely not going to end up in one of my drawers anytime soon. And that's it. I know, I didn't go through all the specs, and you're bound to have questions. Use those comments down below to ask questions or to talk about your personal experiences with the Mavic or other copters. And in future videos, I will walk through my settings for the Mavic, more of the options available because there are many, and how I take videos from my Mavic to YouTube. Thanks for watching, and happy flying.